Welcome into another Key of David podcast. I've got David the Lion Douglas and Trevor Keys, and we have, again, an amazing guest for you. And he's becoming one of my favorite guests. Not anything against any of the other guests that we've had, but we've got Lance Weaver back. And I know the last time we had him on, we talked about some deep stuff. And this time, we're going to talk geography of the Book of Mormon. But this is something that you've never heard of before, you've never seen before, so it's totally unique. Lance, welcome into the show again, man. Thanks for joining us.
Man, I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me again.
So real quick, just so everybody understands, your background in maps, in geography, and in geology. If you could just give our listeners a brief overview of that.
Yeah, no problem. My professional career, I'm a geologist and kind of specialize in geology, visual representations, visualizations to help people understand geology. Super love teaching geology. But I think that's kind of made me kind of specially, qualified and have a really good background to kind of teach people what we're going to be talking about today, right? Which is Book of Mormon geography.
You're a nerd. You're basically a nerd.
Oh,
Talk to me about when you were a kid with maps.
Yeah, I'm definitely a nerd. So yeah, it's crazy with as far as like Book of Mormon geography and maps and stuff. I mean, my parents met at the Hail Cumorah pageant. It's kind of funny. But from a young age, like I just got so into maps, right? Even before I had any clue what the Book of Mormon was, I loved maps. And I remember I learned like probably in 7th grade about topo maps. This is like before the internet, right? So there were no MapQuest or Google Maps or Google Earth for anything. So I learned about these topo maps. They sold them like at the local bike shop, and I started buying these 7.5-minute USGS topo maps, and they just like blew me away. I was so excited. I bought one after another until I had like the entire southwest corner of Utah, and I wallpapered like my whole room with topo maps. I stitched them together, taped them together. It was floor to ceiling. It actually wrapped up onto the ceiling and around 2 walls. And I would just sit there and stare at these topo maps and be blown away by the fact that it was like, holy cow, I can know a place before I even get there. And I really loved hiking. I started loving hiking kind of with my dad at an early age, and kind of loved the idea that I could look at a canyon in Zion, be like, oh, I can kind of know what this canyon is going to be like even before I get there. And I'd study it, and I'd go and go to it and be like, oh, I was right in this way because I understand the elevation, the spatial relationships. So then I got into the Book of Mormon, right, a little bit after that. So around 9th, I think the end of 9th grade, I got my patriarchal blessing, and it was like strangely specific. Just kind of really wild. It like tells me to study like plate tectonics and says I have this work to do for the Lord. And I don't know, there's a lot of things with patriarchal blessings. Maybe
you're the only one I've ever heard that has plate tectonics in their patriarchal blessing. So
that's what I was going to say. I was going to say that is the wildest. I guarantee you, your patriarch, while he's giving it, that pops into his mind. And he's like, I'm not going to say that. Keeps going. He's like, no, I'm not going to say that.
It is like strange. I've always wondered if he just was like science nerd and told everyone that, whether it's me, but he's like, you have very specific work to do for the Lord, and you need to study the world's changing geography and plate tectonics and concepts of the atom. And I was like, well, that's kind of wild. And my parents afterwards really were the same way. I'd had 4 other siblings get it beforehand. I think they were like,
is your dad a scientist or anything?
No, he's a cowboy. He was a cowboy, right? He died right before I left on my mission. Kind of in a tragic car accident.
That patriarch sounds like he dropped some prophecy based off of what we're going to lay out here. So
it was wild. It makes me think like how much, there ends up being self-fulfilling prophecy in patriarchal blessing, how much it was like he just kind of saw that I was going to be interested in this.
That's a good point.
I think they're channeling. I mean, I've talked to many patriarchs, and they go through like the good ones. They fast, they pray, they study the person that they're going to give a blessing to. And they really have, in my opinion, one of the most demanding jobs in the church to receive revelation for another person. And it is a channeled, it's channeling, it's revelation. And so I think if it doesn't come to fruition, it's because you didn't do what the blessing told you to do. And the fact that you read your blessing and said, okay, I hear you, Lord. This is what I'm going to study. So your background and what you studied in school is what? Geography, or what did you go to school for?
Geology. Yeah, I got my degree in geology.
Okay. From where?
I went to BYU first, and then went to the University of Utah after that. So
Okay.
I went to Dixie, which now is a Utah Tech down in St. George, I guess is, and then BYU for my undergraduate, and then did some graduate
And then
work at the University
you've
of Utah.
been in the world of geology ever since.
Yeah, that's been my career. And
Gotcha.
and geology, that's a different story, right? And it's so cool because when I was so into maps, and when I took my first geology class, like before my mission, my college, I went right before my mission. I remember after topo maps, I got into these geology maps that the Utah Geological Survey had put out, and I started kind of putting them on my wall. And I remember seeing all these colors and trying to understand. You can't go to St. George. Like if you've been to St. George, you can't go there without being like, well, what are these layers? What are the cliffs? What's happening here? And this geology professor, I remember I went to one geology professor and
Trevor,
asked
go
him,
back to Lance.
and I asked him, right? I'm like, I have this geology map and I don't really get what these colors are doing. And it's like, how is that the Heartland fault there? How does this work? And he explained to me some big thing and it made no sense. And I was just like, I still don't get it. And I went to the second geology professor and he actually took the geology map and folded it. He folded the paper in a certain way. And he's like, no, don't you see, this is showing the strata, the folds in the actual strata. And it blew my mind. It transformed my whole life. The second that he folded the paper and I was like, whoa, that's what the layers are doing. It opened up my mind to the fact that I can see underground. If I learn to read this map, I can see underground. I can see how every one of these layers go underground. I want to trace them all the way across the strait.
We really could use someone that could see underground. That's quite interesting. We were just talking about.
Once you really get geology, you can follow the strata all the way across the west, and then you can start piecing together the past so that you can see into the past. You add a whole other dimension to when one person sees a scene and they just see some cool hills. I mean, it's well, that's the Navajo sandstone, that's the Carmel, that extends all the way into Wyoming. That was deposited in the mid-Jurassic. I can piece together everything through time, and it's just this whole. Anyway, it's pretty cool stuff.
So we need you on one of our field trips. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes. I sometimes do little tours on the side. But I definitely love kind of teaching people that stuff on little field trips.
I got to say this before you jump in, Shane. As you're explaining your bedroom, are you familiar with the meme from Charlie on "It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia"?
All the little strings going all over the place.
That's kind of how your room was as a 9-year-old.
Yeah, that's basically it.
So you've also built some software yourself. So you're also a software guy, and I want to jump into the software that you built to show some of the geological things that you're talking about.
Yeah, I'd love to show that. And that's how I kind of first got my first job. When Google Maps came out, right? First it was MapQuest, then Google Maps came out, and I was like, dude, you got to take these geology maps and put them on Google Maps. And so ever since I've been working on doing true visualizations, right, for geologic maps. And so here I'll show my screen here. Let me just put it up.
Okay, so I gotta say, when people see this, they're gonna lose their mind at the level of nerd and time and effort that Lance has put into this. This is so crazy, and hopefully you're gonna show the one that has all the dots, because
we'll get there.
Yeah, I'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah, this is definitely shows my nerd. I'm a proud nerd here. But all right, so this is a geologic map. Right. And so we started when just these 2-dimensional maps where it's okay, we can actually put the geology, right? And I grew up in St. George. And so I always loved Southern Utah geology. And each one of these colors is a different geologic layer, right? So you can click on it and find out, the age and characteristics of the geologic strata in that area. But the cool part, right, which is what I really wanted to get to for 10 years, it took me to try and figure out a way to make these 3D, right? So now you can actually get in and see all these geologic layers in 3D.
This is so incredible.
Where are we looking at right here? What mountain range is that?
So this right here to the left, on the left side, is Pine Valley Mountain. So that's a giant early Cenozoic laccolith, right? Huge igneous intrusion.
Where at in Utah, though, without all the
St. George?
Sorry, just north of St. George.
Okay.
When you go to St. George and you look to the north, you're looking at Pine Valley Mountain. And when you're driving between Cedar City and St. George, you drive along this huge cliff, and that is this massive south flank of the Canara Anticline. So you can see those layers totally folded, right? That's a massive fold cut in half by a Miocene-Pliocene fault. Anyway, it's so cool. So anyway, let me move forward with that. This is my geologic map, and then I have a website, right? That let's see, I'll just go here, utahgeology.com. That I started building in college, and I really wanted to try and teach people not only the geologic maps but how they progress through time. And so that's when I started kind of building these other maps where I'm actually kind of showing the paleogeography, which is like the study of the Earth through time, right? And so you can actually kind of like move a slider and see where the
Oh
seas
my
like come.
gosh.
So you can see where the Cretaceous
Whoa.
You gotta be
Seaway.
kidding me.
Does it show the time as well?
Yeah, like
Like
down in that left-hand corner, that is the time. Like 60 million years ago, we had the last remnants of the Cretaceous Seaway moving down in. We had a couple folds starting to bifurcate that Cretaceous Seaway. You know, then it all cleared up, and we were left with these huge lakes, early Cenozoic lakes. Anyway, so this is just things I'm super interested in, like on all
So
of these.
Lance, real quick, because there are some people that only think the Earth is like 6,000 years old. What do you say to that?
I really, when I first got into geology before my mission, right, that was like one of the huge questions I had, because I was totally familiar with all the early church leaders who were totally creationists, right? And I wanted to see whether that was like a viable theory. And I really, I sympathize with creationists, and I love them. I think that they actually help the science, because there is a lot of issues. I'm no longer a creationist. Like when I started geology, I wanted to, like, I definitely was open to completely both viewpoints. And I was like, yeah, if the world's 6,000 years old, cool. I want to make it work. I'm going to work my way from the bottom of the Grand Canyon to the top of Bryce and go through every single layer and fulfill, like in my mind, how it has to happen, and see if it could happen somehow in 6,000 years if we had enough catastrophe.
I have a Meso friend that believes that the Earth is millions or billions of years old, while mankind and animals are much younger period of time.
I have gone through every one of those arguments in my mind, and like we could do entire episodes on just kind of going through the implications. Episode. Yeah, because the majority of those kind of ideas, like the idea that that God took previous creations and dinosaur bones are from like one planet that crashed into this planet, they just don't work, right? And I'd be totally open if the evidence pointed that way. Like I'm not like I feel like a lot of people in science are kind of dogmatic. They almost have a dogma to their science, just like someone in religion does, where it's like they don't really consider the other viewpoint. And I'm going to make it clear that I'm not sold. Even now, I definitely don't believe that the Earth is the exact date of what our radiometric dates say, right? There's been some recent studies like out of Stanford that talk about how neutrinos actually affect the decay rates of things like uranium. All of our all of our radioisotopes that we use for radiometric dating, you know, whether it's argon or potassium or uranium or whatever, they are affected by neutrino flux. And so, and that's in its very infancy. I think that we'll find out in the past that as our solar system kind of goes around the Milky Way galaxy, we actually go through the different arms, and there is hugely different kind of fields of neutrino flux, and that actually affects the decay rates. And so I do believe the Earth is very old, but I also do not hold to the idea that the exact date that our radiometric dates to give are exactly right. Right. So anyway, let's jump past that. Maybe I'll move out of geology really quick.
No,
show us your maps.
No, okay. We're gonna get to those dots. I know Trevor wants to jump to those dots, but that's part of the whole model we're gonna discuss.
Yeah, the dots are next. And I have some really awesome, like I love fringe theories. Like I said, I love creationists because I love people who have fringe theories. I think that pushes the science forward, regardless of whether you believe with what they teach. I think we should have two very opposing viewpoints in all sciences, and that they should kind of fight it out, and that's really healthy for the science, which is why when we jump into Book of Mormon geography, I think it's awesome that the Lord has kind of like made these two major models of the Heartland and the Mesoamericanists, because when you have these two very different viewpoints, it keeps the science from being bogged down in dogma, where it's like, this is just the way it is. Like we need two different people to have two different, like widely different viewpoints that are completely fighting with each other to advance the science. You know, it almost seems counterintuitive, but I really think that is true. And I have some awesome views on the Ice Age. You know, I have some cool visualizations. This is what I made of where the ice cap is, and trying to ask yourself, why was Siberia never glaciated? Why was the northern Yukon never glaciated? Is it really because it's an Arctic desert? Or is there maybe another reason why it's centered on Greenland? That we could do an episode on that. Okay, so let's move forward on to archaeology. Okay, so as I was getting into the Book of Mormon geography, right, which is right after my mission, I started getting into this. And me and my brother, we just had some amazing experiences, like real crazy spiritual experiences, where I feel like I was being taught by like spiritual beings, kind of like I'd wake up with these kind of visionary experiences in that hypoponic state, like right between sleep and wakefulness, right? And then you wake up, and really cool experiences. And so in order to really kind of like push forward these ideas that I was getting, some of them that I didn't understand, I was like, well, I need to know where every archaeological site is. And so that's when I started building this archaeological site explorer, and I've cataloged every single major archaeological site in North America. Right. So this is all of them. So like whether you're in Mesoamerica and you want to see every major site, or whether you're in the Heartland and you want to see every site, this was kind of like my launching point. It's like, well, okay, if we're going to solve this, I need to know where they all are. And not only that, I need to be able to find out information right on them. So I have like a database that this is connected to. So that has all the cursory information of its date, and it links to the Wikipedia article. You can even see, images. So
Lance, I've literally started the same thing, but this is far superior. I have a Google Earth where
I've seen David's map. It's 14 pins in Google Earth. Okay. 14 pins.
He's not wrong.
So you can actually take this exact layer, and I have a network layer on Google Earth. So if you click on my KML, you can download a KML and open this exact same thing in Google Earth.
And for anybody that wants to go to this site, Lance, they just go to utahgeology.com, and it's available to anybody to be able to access this and use this tool.
You can get it through utahgeology.com or my Gather in One site. Yeah. And you can visualize the sites by population. So the bigger, sites end up showing a little bit different. You can add.
Just so you know, after this call, you're going to have to pay $5.99 through an app through Zion Media to be able to access these things. Now,
$29.99. Come on. Hey, so just so that we're clear, each one of these dots, you personally went in there and put the correlated information. You did this.
Yeah. So the North American sites, I did every single one of them individually. The old world sites, I found a site that had them. And they're only more major sites, really. But on these old world sites, I did every single site. So I personally kind of looked into every site.
In order for a dot to make muster to get on this map, what were you saying this is an important one? Like, what do these represent? What do the different colors represent?
So the colors, if you kind of look here, are mainly cultures. So I've kind of separated the Mayan culture from like the Mixtec and the Aztec versus the Hopewell and the Adena, or the Mississippian sites, or the Southwest sites, right? Anasazi, formerly Anasazi, now ancient.
Are these artifacts? Are these ancient structures? Are they civilization? Like, what are each of these?
It kind of depends by age. Like, so for instance, up here, if you want to see them by age, like if you want to just see Paleo-Indian sites, almost all Paleo sites are really just lithics. They end up being just like small rock chip things. There's very few structures when you get into the Paleo-Indo and even early Archaic. But as you get into the formative, then it's like I'm mostly doing things that actually have structures. But I have that in my database. Like you can see whether there's actually a structure and what it is. And in areas where there's just not very many sites, I might put in a site that's more minor site. Whereas in sites like the Mayan Lens or the Mexican Highland, it has to be a pretty significant site for me to add it to the map.
Okay, so now
can you turn
Shane and everyone else. Sorry, Dave, I got to get this out. I was so excited about these dots. Have you guys seen The Aviator with Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yes.
You know the part where he says, "Bring me the blueprints. Bring me the blueprints. Bring me the blueprints. Bring me the blueprints. Bring me all the blueprints." That's how I felt about this when I saw it.
What was David's question?
Yeah, I just was wondering. This is 3D as well, isn't it?
Okay, yeah. So if you want to, you can like go into here and right here kind of switch to the 3D version, right? I've got like this 3D or exaggerated 3D. So if you go to that, it actually becomes like a 3D site. But you have to have a pretty fast computer. When I have all these tabs open like I do right now, it's actually a little bit slow.
Can you go zoom in? Can you go zoom in on an area?
Yeah. So let's say that I want to zoom in on the Valley of Mexico.
Please show us that Nephite site or that site that had a temple.
So let me see the biggest, best, awesomest ruins in all of North America, right here, Teotihuacan. Right. So if you zoom in on it, then you see like, holy crap.
In Central, is it Central America where that is?
This is in the Valley of Mexico, right by Mexico City.
Oh, okay.
Right. Look, these pyramids are so huge. They're actually being caught by an elevation layer, which is unusual to have a site that big. But yeah, so you can actually zoom in just like Google Earth and see, the Avenue of the Dead, the main avenue of Teotihuacan, Temple of the Sun, Temple of the Moon, right? And this was built, the city started about 200 BC, somewhere between 100 and 200 BC, and then really hit its apex where the main pyramids were getting built right around the time of Christ. But that's how every single site is like, and I can open this on Google Earth, right? And so you can zoom in. And most of the sites, the sites that have a visitor center and already are widely known are right on spot, right? But some of the sites where they're not widely known, and so people might be worried about looting or something like that, they end up being obfuscated a little bit and being off the main site. But
Incredible. Incredible.
Yes. All right,
so
let's jump into the slide deck.
So just so everybody understands, Lance knows what the freak he's talking about. Like, there's a lot of people out there pontificating about this or that. If you go look at their resume, I would put Lance's resume up against anybody else that has a theory out there and say, show me your work. Show me what you've done. Show me your research. And Lance would whoop them. Like,
bring
if I'm
me your blueprints, bring me your blueprints.
Yeah, exactly.
Show me your 14 points on your Earth map.
Yeah, I mean, I would challenge any. Oh, well, before we go now, once we jump into the slide, we're going to cover what is the Heartland model, what is the Meso model, correct?
Yeah. So I think, and that's going to be like the main part of this video. I'm not going to get too much into my model. I think we'll just kind of hit it, kind of a cursory overview. But I think in this video, we're going to really talk about what is necessary for a model, right? We're going to start with the internal model, which is what the Book of Mormon actually says, right? And even then, you can go to my website and I have every single reference, right? I have a site or a page right here on Book of Mormon geography and internal model, right? So I've gone through and gotten every single internal reference to the Book of Mormon that there is. And you can go and you can click on the actual scriptures, right? And open them in a new tab and read the scripture itself. So you can go through the 100.
You're my favorite kind of nerd. The guys that make it so when I find a site like this, it's a black hole. I'm just lost.
Yeah, there is a lot on here. And I even go into Egyptian chronology because I'm trying to kind of do a revised Egyptian chronology.
And how long have you been putting this together on your site? Because this wasn't something you did overnight.
No.
Talk to us a little bit about the time that are you still even updating it even today?
I'll go through kind of periods in my life where I work on it more, between my Utah geology site and my Gathered in One site. I started both of them in college, so I've been working on both for almost 20 years. But I spent thousands of hours. Not lately, I haven't worked on them as much as I did maybe 10 years ago or so, and then definitely in college worked a ton on them. But
would you say that you've spent at least 10,000 hours on this stuff?
Well, yeah.
So they say if you spend 10,000 hours on something, you become an expert. So
5,000's an expert. 5,000's an expert.
Okay. Yeah. And it's hard because I end up jumping between geology and archaeology and geoarchaeology and how archaeology interfaces with geoarchaeology, especially with magnetic field issues and possibilities of, anyway, I'm not getting into, because I'm a real, never mind. I'm not even, you got to keep me on track because I can easily go on tangents here.
Let's jump into the slides and let's discuss the different theories that exist out there. You got to understand, for me, I didn't even know what the Heartland thing was until I met David Douglas and he's talking about Heartland model. I'm like, what are you talking about? I always thought in my head that, somehow it took place. I don't know. I didn't really care. I was one of those guys that's like, it could have taken place, like we talked about, in a different dimension. For all I care, I don't really know, but it brings me closer to Christ. So I'm not going to, spend my time thinking about this, but I see the value now because a lot of people want proof. A lot of people want to know we know where the Bible took place. So if we know where the Bible took place, we should know where the Book of Mormon took place. 10,000 hours is actually the agreed amount. Oh, thank you. It's not 5,000.
Corporate's back there, checking everything we say.
Trevor, you're keeping us honest here.
Okay, let's jump into the slides and teach me the different models, and then let's blow people's mind with the Continental Model.
Okay, yeah, but at the very end, we'll get into my model. Let's start by talking about so we're gonna go from here. Oh, this is just the first map I drew in 10th grade, right? So actually, as I read the Book of Mormon, and I read it over like a 2-day period, the entire book, I made my own map. And
that is so cool.
I bring this up because my map as a 10th grader ended up, and I hadn't, to my memory, I don't think I'd seen any existing maps. We didn't have any of that. I mean, the internet didn't exist, and I don't think that we had any maps that were even similar. This is like completely my model. And yet it correlates pretty similar to what you find in other people's models, right? So these are some of the 3 most popular models, internal models, right? And here on the left, we've got like the model that was done by the BOU crew recently. And the fact that the color of their things, I actually think they looked at my map even 10 years ago because of the choice of their colored markers. But maybe not.
And to chime in, literally, we started talking about this with you, and the day we filmed our first episode with you on geography, who was it that you sent us that posted something on this? The Book of Mormon Central, right?
Yeah, Book of Mormon Central. That was kind of weird. Yeah, the exact day that we started talking about it. It's like they hadn't done it in a couple weeks or months, and suddenly they threw that out there. It's in the air. But anyway,
they know what's coming.
Yeah, and who knows? And there's a lot of people that aren't going to agree with my model. People who already have it in their mind, like this is where it happened. They won't agree with mine. That's fine. I have a really strong, you could say, like testimony. Essentially, I really feel strongly about my model. I really feel strongly that I have been taught by higher beings. Maybe I'm wrong. So you can judge that for yourself. I think at first glance, everyone's going to have problems with every model, but I hope you kind of like give it a chance, because we would really have to do 100 hours of videos to get into all the stuff I've got with every city, right? I have every single city correlated with a city in ways that I think are amazing, and that people have something in their mind are probably going to disagree, and maybe I'm wrong in some parts, because there's parts I'm really confident about and parts I'm not. So, but let's dive into the internal model really quick, because we're going to use that as a launch pad to go into the Heartland and the Mesoamerican models. And I just want people to really understand these three major models, that these are independent people who made it. And like I said, they're similar to one that I made in 10th grade. Like the Book of Mormon's internal geography is incredibly consistent. Like it really is really good, right? And most people are going to get a general idea like this with the same points. And I want to just hit kind of some of those major points in this. Okay, so some of the major points I want to hit. First of all is the sea east and the sea west, right? The Book of Mormon is pretty clear on there being a sea east and a sea west, right? And it's pretty clear on where the cities are in relation to that. And so, like, for instance, this is my latest internal model that I've done. And I just want people to see some of these scriptures. Like, for instance, in the bottom right-hand area here, where I say the land southward layout. Like, if you read Alma 27, 28, 32, I mean, it's pretty specific, right? Where it says the king sent a proclamation throughout all the land amongst all his people who were in the land of Nephi, which was bordering even to the sea on the east and on the west, which was divided from the land of Zarahemla by a narrow strip of wilderness, which ran from the sea east even to the sea west. Like it's specifically saying there, like things like the land of Nephi, the land of Zarahemla, and the narrow strip of wilderness run from the sea east to the sea west. So any model that we have to like have a sea east and a sea west. And you can see why people thought, well, it's got to be in Mesoamerica, because the sea east and the sea west are right there, and you can have lands going all the way from one side to another. But if you're a Heartlander, you got to be like, oh, well, maybe the seas are the Great Lakes, and maybe the land is running between them, right? Okay, so we've got a sea east and a sea west. We've got a river Sidon, right? We know that the river Sidon is the only river mentioned in the Book of Mormon. It's mentioned really specifically many times. It's mentioned as a border, right? In fact, Alma 22:27, when it's talking about the narrow strip of wilderness, says the river Sidon running from the east to the west, in a way that there's two ways to interpret it. One way is to interpret that the river Sidon is running from the east to the west, right? You read it there and it's like, it says it. So if that clause is really clarifying the river Sidon, then it's like, yeah, the river Sidon runs generally from east to west. Although it could also be talking about the narrow strip of wilderness, in a weird way. And so that's only talking about the narrow strip of wilderness. But then we also have places in the Book of Mormon where it's talking about east and west banks of the river Sidon. We have the land of Manti, where the headwaters or the head of the river Sidon is. And then we know it goes by the land of Zarahemla, which we know is north of Manti. So then in that case, most people think, well, it generally runs from south to north. But I mean, all rivers usually snake their way about. And so maybe it runs both east to west and from south to north, right? But another thing is like, well, where does the river empty into the sea? We have these really amazing chapters, Alma, 49, 48, definitely 50 through 53, where we have these descriptions of the movement of the armies during the Great War with Captain Moroni. And there's two main centers of those wars. One of them is in the Southwest frontier cities, and one of them is in the East Sea cities, right? And so the Southwest frontier cities, we have a city by the sea, and then the army goes all the way to the land of Manti. And we know that that's like the Southwest border. So those cities of Antipyra, Kumenai, Zeezrom, and Manti, they run from the head of River Sidon all the way to the West Sea, right? And you can't get around that. You have to have those cities, and they have to go from the West Sea to the head of the River Sidon. And then there's two scriptures that specifically talk about the city of Manti and the head of Sidon in relationship to the city of Nephihah, where the army is going to take a march from Manti to Nephihah. And we know that Nephihah is next to Moroni, and that those were built as a new border, right? Alma 51, Moroni creates a new border, and he moves it from where it was previously, which I think was the River Sidon. And then he moves it southward to this new string of cities that he makes, where he kicks the Lamanites out of the land on the east and west sea, and he kicks them southward, and he builds this new border all the way across. So we have to have that new border too. We have to have a borderland where we have a city by the west sea stretching all the way to the city of Moroni on the east sea, and that has to be in every internal model. And then there's another chapter, right, in Alma 52, where we have Amalickiah, and he goes all the way from the city of Moroni to Nephihah and captures everything up to Bountiful. And so then we got to have all those cities that are on the EC, because it says specifically they're all on the EC, right? And just this illustration I have here is full of so much information. Like if you just go to this and just read every one of those references, it'll really show specifically why this internal model matches so closely with the ones that I didn't do. Like these are independent people, and they're all pretty similar. They all have those East Coast cities. They all have that narrow strip of wilderness beyond the city of land Manti. They all have Antipyrite to Zeezrom to Manti, kind of come all the way from the West Sea. Those things, they need to be in an internal, or that they're consistent in the internal models. They need to be in your external model. Okay, does all that make sense to everyone?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so let me see if I'm missing anything else. We have a narrow neck, right? And the narrow neck is an interesting thing in my mind, and I think in everyone's mind. The most straightforward reading of the narrow neck really seems to suggest that it's like this tiny narrow neck of land between the land southward and the land northward. And it's really only mentioned kind of twice. In the other cases, it talks about narrow strips, narrow passes, which may or may not be on the narrow neck. We're not sure, but at first reading, it kind of suggests that way. That it's like, well, they seem like maybe they're on the narrow passes are on the narrow neck, but maybe not. Maybe that's an assumption, because it doesn't really specifically say that. But even when in my first reading, I kind of thought, my general thought is it's like this narrow neck is north of the land of Bountiful, right? On the border of Bountiful and Desolation, you've got a narrow neck, and so it has to be that way. So you'll see in my model that I actually reinterpret that, and I think that the narrow neck is actually why we've all gotten it wrong. It's why we can't agree.
In the Meso model, what is the narrow neck? And in the Heartland model, what is the narrow neck?
So, and we'll get into this into more detail, but like, so here's the different models, right? The main models. We've got the Heartland models up here, Mayanland models down here, the Baja model. So in the Meso models, or the Mayanland models, the narrow neck of land in almost all of them is the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. So can you see kind of my cursor there going from the land of Bountiful?
Yep.
That's the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, right? So northern Chiapas there to Veracruz, we've got kind of this narrow neck, but the problem is it's not really that narrow, right? When you compare the Isthmus of Tehuantepec to all the other little isthmuses going all the way to Panama, it's like the biggest of them all. It's no more narrow than anywhere else. And the only kind of distance ideas that we get is we have those narrow passes where it talks about a day in one instance and a day and a half in another journey across these narrow passes, where it's kind of like, well, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is 150 miles. I mean, there's no way you can make that in a day and a half. No one could. And so then Mayanland model people have to be like, well, so even they don't believe that the narrow passes are the same as the narrow neck. They think they must be some subset of the narrow neck that's more like 30 miles wide, because a day to a day and a half journey, I mean, that's between 20 and 30 miles. So the narrow passes, maybe they're not on the narrow neck, or maybe they are and they're just a subset of it. But that's what makes Mayan sleep.
And in the Heartland model, where's their narrow neck?
So the Heartland models, I think, are more bifurcated. There's more variety in Heartland models on exactly how they believe that. In the Mayanland models, there's really only two predominant models, and one is having the river Sidon be the river Grijalva, which is this southern river. Can you kind of see where I have that Zarahemla there? Yeah, that's the Grijalva River. And then this northern one is the Usumacinta River. And there's kind of a fairly large split, right? Followers of John Sorensen, who's a BYU professor, kind of favoring the Grijalva River as the land of Zarahemla, and other people like I think it was Norman, Garth Norman or whatever, who did the Usumacinta, and he kind of believed, well, that's actually the land of Zarahemla, the city of Zarahemla.
I have a question here.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, now I just noticed that in your Heartland focus there, that, and I haven't seen, like, I've seen some of your maps so far, but I haven't seen one particularly that includes the Black Swamp. And do you know what I'm talking about when I say the Black Swamp?
I vaguely remember, is there something kind of there between the Great Lakes where there's a really swampy area?
Yeah, so the Heartland model includes a larger Lake Erie, and on the west side of Michigan, that it's, we believe, or at least, you know, as a Heartlander, basically that those two seas, or those two bodies of water, were a lot larger. And there's some evidence when it was Louisiana, and when the Louisiana Purchase, you know, was made, then people started drying up that Black Swamp to be livable land. But you know, Heartlanders, you know, see a narrow neck at the base or at the bottom of Michigan because of the sea east and, you know, the supposed sea west. So I wondered if you ever had explored that.
I remember seeing something about that, and I've really gone through the Heartlander model a lot. But like I say, there's not a huge amount of consensus. There's actually, between the YouTube videos and Rod Meldrum, who's an amazing guy, just awesome guy, you know, or Jonathan Neville, all these great guys. They've all got kind of little tweaks and differences in their models that I've seen, and so then it's kind of hard to even like draw it, because they've even changed kind of their minds over time quite a bit. But they've got amazing correlations, which I kind of want to go through and just hit the strengths of their models first, and maybe touch on the weaknesses.
Yes, do it. Do we want to start with Heartland first?
Yeah, let's start with Heartland first, and then maybe David, you can kind of poke in anytime that you have a question or kind of something, because I think that you're the biggest Heartland proponent here, and so and I hope we do a future episode maybe with Rod Meldrum or some of those guys here and actually talk to them about their models.
It's possible.
And then maybe we can kind of poke each other's models a little bit, challenge each other. But I hope that this doesn't come across negative in anything I say. I really love the fact that, like I said, that the church has multiple working hypotheses, and I think it should stay that way, because I think that the more we have kind of real opposing views, the more we build the science. But I hope that my view for a large number of people really kind of bridges that gap, because my model actually incorporates both the Mesoamerican and the Heartland models together in a single model by solving a narrow neck dilemma. But okay, so let's go to the Heartland model. So the Heartland model.
Safe to say that your model is the unified model.
Yeah, you could say that, I think.
Yeah, I love that name.
Yeah, that's kind of a cool. It tweaks both models, you know, quite a bit, but the general regions, are both in my model. My land southward is Mesoamerica, my land northward is. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to jump into this really quick. I think some of the biggest, the most important thing about the Heartland model and its biggest strength, right, is that I think that Ron, Jonathan, a lot of these guys, when they found that they were in the Mesoamerican models, were trying to have two Comoras and having a Comora down, so that the Comora that Joseph Smith and that traditionally the church held, you know, for the first 150 years of its existence, the Comora being in New York, that was a real problem to them. That's a problem to me too. And I think it's a problem to a lot of people. And I think that the great success that the Heartland model has had in kind of like gaining adherence has to do with that more than anything. Because, you know, it's hard to get away from the idea, like if you try and say the Comora wasn't in North America, you kind of make Joseph Smith into a fool. You really do. Because he has some pretty specific quotes from Zelf. And there's ways that, you know, I've talked to some of the Mayan people and they try and get away from this, try and say Zelf was like a post Book of Mormon Nephite, and that the archaeology proves that anyway. But Joseph Smith's quotes are very specific. You know, when he's talking about the land of the Nephites, roaming around the hills, the land of the Nephites, there's a lot of very specific quotes when they're having visions and they're seeing into the hill Cumorah, and they're specifically thinking of New York when they're talking about the hill Cumorah. If you say the hill Cumorah is in Veracruz, you say that Joseph Smith didn't really know his geography, right? And like I say, I think my model is the closest to Joseph Smith's of all of them, because there are also pretty specific quotes by the Times and Seasons that Joseph Smith is chief editor of that puts the Book of Mormon in the Mayan lens, right? In one case, kind of putting Zarahemla right there in the city of Tula, which is in the Valley of Mexico, and in another case, identifying it with a couple of different sites like Palenque down in the Mayan lens. But anyway, so there are quotes for both of them, and both camps kind of have to dismiss the other quotes from Joseph Smith. But the Heartland model almost, I think, had to arise in reaction to putting Cumorah down south, because there's just so much in North America that you suddenly have to say, no, this wasn't part of the Book of Mormon. You're kind of, poo-pooing early quotes by prophets all the way from Joseph Smith to the early 60s. You're taking away a lot of people's really deep convictions just in their heart, where they think, oh, well, I actually feel the Book of Mormon, spiritually in these regions. On top of that, there's just a lot of issues. I'm trying to think the other.
Anytime that I've wanted to ask somebody how much and try to ascertain how much information they know about the geography, I ask them, is there 2 Cumorahs or 1 Cumorah? And I know that's a big debate and conversation point, and it's always fun to start that combo.
Yeah,
Cumorah combo.
Yeah, because pretty much all the Heartland models are holding to the 2 Cumorah theory.
I mean, there has to be 2 Cumorahs if it's the Meso model. You say Mayan model. I think more people say Meso, don't they?
Yeah, let's call it Meso. Okay. And I might misspeak in a lot of different things as far as little words I say, so everyone have patience with me.
Hey, you got your own nomenclature. We're just getting caught up. Okay,
right.
Take over.
Okay, so the one other thing I was going to say that's a really big thing with the Heartland model, right, is we've got a lot of prophecies concerning like the future of this land. Like the Mormon prophets, Book of Mormon prophets, are talking about a huge nation, powerful nation, more powerful than any of the other nations, coming forth on the land, on the face of this land, and the Gentiles coming onto this land. And so I think a lot of people realize it's like, well, that sure feels like America. I mean, sure, Mexico's cool, and it was part of the Spanish Empire.
It sounds like America, and it sounds like the Native Americans. Like I don't know, you can't get around that either.
Yeah, and we have a number of, like your guests, we've had who are Native Americans who are like, well, our mythology, our entire history that we've orally transmitted fits right with the Book of Mormon, and it's here in North America. So if you put it in South America, how are we going to believe in that? And I think it's silly, just the idea that's like, well, why, if it all happened in Mesoamerica, why on earth would he send Moroni all the way up to New England? Like, just have somebody in Mexico reveal the Book of Mormon. Like, why even involve America and Joseph Smith in New England if it didn't happen in the Americas? Like, all of that rings true in my heart. And to try and take that away and say, no, it was all in Mesoamerica, completely, I think, destroys a lot of aspects of the text, a lot of quotes. It's just so much that doesn't ring true there in my heart too. And I think that that's what a lot of people feel who have kind of come to espouse the Heartland theory, which maybe David can speak to that, because he really is a great fan of the Heartland theory.
This is really fascinating, actually, just to be discussing the unified model, because I don't think anybody's ever been recorded discussing this as effectively or extensively as you have, or as you are, because the Heartlanders have tons of videos, and then there's plenty of books on the Mesoamerican model. And so I mean, I absolutely agree with everything you've discussed, but as you've shared this, I'm becoming more and more converted to this unified model, because I mean, I hear it from Mitiga, I hear it from Cloudpiler, I hear it from my friend from the Heartland, not just Rod and Wayne, but also Mike and Betty Fontaine, who are 2 other natives, Chippewa and Navajo. I hear it from Sean Littlebear, and just again all these natives I gotten to meet as I've made Ancient Answers and made videos and stuff. But I feel like everything you're sharing is just everything we've said in the Heartland. And even my Meso friend, Brother Rick, we all, I think it all fits in what you're sharing.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that a lot of Heartlanders, once they've really gone through the hours of kind of evidence, that they'll open their heart to this idea that it happened in both Mexico and America, right? And I don't think it's coincidence, that Mexico is like the second hub of the church, the next temple out of the US that was built. I mean, it's just, there's so much to Mexico where it just rings true there, but you can't take out North America either, right? So I mean, the split that's happened in the church, I think, is largely a result of archaeology, actually, that happened like in the 40s to the 70s, where they felt like there was no continental unified culture in archaeology. And I think that, like, that's something Chief Mitiga, a lot of the natives, I think, are kicking against that now, that we had this view of the North American Native Americans that was completely wrong, because we saw them as like backwards and not as cruel as Europeans, right? So in Europe, we've got all the way back to the Bronze Age. I mean, for sure back to Darius and Alexander the Great. We've got these armies that are going literally 3,000 to 5,000 miles to conquer empires, right? 3,000 to 5,000 miles. Like it is a unified culture in a way, but it is empires all the way from India to North Africa. And they're going all the way up to England and all the way down to Sudan. And there's just these massive cultures. And yet we think in the archaeology, even today, sometimes, this is being broken up, that the Native Americans like, no, they didn't go that's just too far. They couldn't go 3,000 miles from New York to Mesoamerica. They were just too backwards. They didn't have boats or horses. It's like, I mean, the Plains Indians used dogs to carry their teepees. They had pack animals, right? Some of them even used deer. If you read the early Spaniard chronicles, it's like they had boats. Like you read De Soto's. I've read so many of these early early Spanish people who themselves went 3,000 to 5,000 miles. Not to mention like the Saints going 3,000 miles from New York. Like people in the old world they traveled, and there was traveling and trade all the way from the Great Lakes to the Valley of Mexico, and it wasn't a like something that hardly ever happened. It happened all the time.
So let's take a look at the Mesoamerica or the Mayan land model. Now that we've kind of looked at the Heartland model, let's have you talk about the Sorensen model, the strengths and weaknesses of that model.
Okay. And now we're going to switch between the Grijalva and the Sumacinta models here. But so here's the Sumacinta, here's the Grijalva. They're both really similar, right? But their main correlations, right, is you've got the narrow neck being the Isthmus of Tehuantepec right here. They both agree on that. The Olmec being the Jaredites, right? Because there's some great correlations between time periods, even though they completely ignore the fact that there were some pretty awesome cities like Watson Brake and Snake Mounds, some cool mounds in North America that were happening during that same period of time. What is it? Poverty Point and Watson Brake, North American sites that totally match with the Olmec. Here's the Grijalva River here. Hopefully you can see my cursor. They have Zarahemla that we know is on the west bank of the River Sidon. So we have to look for an archaeological site that's on the west bank of the River Sidon. We know that the land of Gideon is on the east bank of the River Sidon. We know that the head of Sidon here, right, is the main boundary between the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla. We know the land of Nephi is kind of a highland. The land of Zarahemla is down in a depression. So this right here would be the main Grijalva model, right? So I'm trying to think what else I might want to explain about this. Sorensen is probably the only person who's really put a ton of actual individual cities, right? So he has a city to every Book of Mormon city, like, Lali Ritad for Manti. He's got Sidon being Chapa de Corso. He's got Santa Rosa being Zarahemla. And some of the real strengths in this model are that the Olmec match amazingly with the Jaredites. They really do. They're very high society, had some of the first writing. They had amazing pyramids, amazing monoliths, giant heads. There's just so many, the early writing, the metallurgy, their technological advancement. There's just a lot of real strengths to these Mesoamerican models. Okay, so let's go over the problems, and then I might jump back to the Heartland here too.
Lance, real quick, is Sorensen dead?
Yeah, he died recently.
When did he die?
I think it was around COVID.
Okay, so you're not like Sorensen reincarnated type deal.
Definitely not.
Okay.
No, and he seemed like a really good guy. And I never met him. I've met a lot of the kind of Heartland proponents, and I've been on forums where I like some of the great, real proponents of Mesoamerican theory. All good guys.
Do you think you put in more hours than Sorensen did at this point in your life on the map? Just on the mapping.
So that's hard to say because I'm only 45 and he died at 80. So I would have to say probably no when it comes to the end of his life. But I think there's very few people that I've met that have put in quite as much time as me. But there's a lot of people, especially some of the BYU professors like Brant Gardner, who've put in way more time when it comes to just like the cultural overviews. Maybe they're not picking specific cities so much, but they are writing book after book on kind of the cultural correlations.
I'm not sure that Sorensen was doing this kind of mapping when he was 9. So
Yeah, and that's something that I really noticed is different too, because I think almost everyone I've ever met, including Sorensen, they kind of like get pushed into or stumble into Book of Mormon geography because they're already there in their professional career or something like that. You know what I mean? Whereas like I feel like was uniquely called to this. Like that's just my opinion. Maybe call me crazy or whatever. Maybe I'm psycho, but I feel like God uniquely called me to this at a young age. And so I have a very strong like spiritual connection to and conviction to my model. And you can take that for what it's worth, you know. But yeah, like the most other people, it's kind of like they just kind of stumbled into it because in their professional career, they're already studying archaeology and they thought, well, maybe I should try and do this. And that usually doesn't happen until they're like in their late 20s or so. But anyway, so you can go through and pause this slide and read all of my things here. And I kind of go through a lot of scriptures and how these would have to correlate. But let me talk about the biggest weaknesses of both of these models, right? Of the Heartland and the Mesoamerican models. Okay, and that really has to do with Alma 50, Alma 51, where you read about the new border that Captain Moroni builds, right? He kicks the Nephites out. It says at the East and West Sea, like on the borderlands, the East and West Sea, he kicks the Lamanites out because they were kind of surrounded by Lamanites. So he kicks them out and makes a border straight from the East Sea to the West Sea, right? And that border is what is fought over by the wars in Captain Moroni. So you have to have this line of strongholds of cities that basically separates the land of Nephi and the land of Nephi and the land of
Yeah,
Zarahemla.
this is amazing.
Right. And so then on any model, you have to be like, well, where is that? And then how can we follow the path of those armies? So look in these Mesoamerican models, it's like that it has to be below the head of the River Sidon. And so since the head of the River Sidon is either the Usumacinta or the Grijalva, we have to have that new border. Can you see where my cursor is here? It would have to be right here. So that means that the cities of Moroni, because it says specifically the cities of Nephihah and Moroni are by that new border. Like they are garrison cities that he creates with the new border. So we would need a land of Moroni here at the edge of Lake Chapala, I think is what that lake is in Guatemala. But there aren't any great sites there. Like if you go back to my map and you look at like sites and the ages, there's no great sites for the city of Moroni and the city of Nephihah. And then the biggest problem is that the army of Amalickiah, they go all the way up that line of cities. Like here, let me just go back to this slide, right? They go all the way up from Lehi to Morianton to Omner to Gid to Mulek and Bountiful, right? It has in that battle, those guys going straight up the East Coast. And it says specifically all of which were on the East Sea, right? And it even kind of gives a couple of kind of distances, right? If you look at Alma 50, Alma 50,
You're starting to make me think. You're really starting to make me think because when I look at this map, I love this map because they said that when Christ came, before he came, the face of the land changed. And we know that if you look in that area of Louisiana, Cuba, there are cities that are submerged in water. People have found them either through LiDAR or having swim down. Like there's a guy that's in Louisiana that swim down and found granite that doesn't belong to that area. And so it makes me think that maybe Florida, maybe Mexico wasn't always like that. I mean, I think clearly Mexico was like that, but just that huge crater of the Gulf of Mexico could have been, a little bit more land that was there.
Yeah. So, and this is where I'm kind of uniquely qualified with my, geology degree and geology background. Because even early on, like the biggest impression that came from me early on is that the Book of Mormon didn't happen in a quarter, right? That the biggest cities in the Book of Mormon, like the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla, especially the land of Zarahemla, are the biggest ruins, right? And that's like pretty huge. And in order to make that work, I'm like, well, okay, where was the narrow neck? And we'll get into my model in a second. And I actually went through these mind exercises really early on when I was going to school. That's like, well, maybe things changed. And so I really looked into catastrophism and creationism and tried to figure out, well, so did the shorelines change? Have they been radically different? It does say that there were cities that were sunk in 3rd Nephi, and then in 4th Nephi, it specifically says that some of those cities could not be renewed, right? Because they went underwater and stayed underwater, which makes it so it can't just be a tsunami, because some of those cities could not be renewed when it's talking about the rebuilding of all these cities, most likely because they were sunk and they never came back up.
Yeah, almost like there was a hollow earth or something that just everything sunk into.
Yeah, and so I think that I don't think that the shorelines have changed dramatically. Okay, and like I say, I really looked into that early on. But you almost, like a lot of these people who create huge changes in the geography, right? They have to kind of divorce things in their mind, because on one side, they're like looking at cities that are radiocarbon dated and they're saying, look, the radiocarbon dates say that these cities match. But on the other hand, they're like, well, I believe that the shoreline changed. Well, it's like, well, the radiocarbon dates would have to show that, because if this is happening 2000 BC and we have radiocarbon dates that are pretty dang reliable, at least back to the Hallstatt Plateau, you know, during the early Iron Age. But certainly at the time of Christ, we can even take a redwood tree and we can like date every 10 rings and then find a radiocarbon date to that. And even though there are variations, right, because the isotope ratios have changed over time, so they do have to correlate a little bit, because radiocarbon dates do get off a little bit. It's not very huge. And we would know from radiocarbon dating if the shoreline changed massively. Does that make sense? So
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So if you're going to try and come up with a model where shorelines have changed drastically, well, at very least, you would have to find a place where there were no cities. So let's take, for instance, the one that Trevor was talking about a little while ago, where somebody sent in an idea that the Gulf of Mexico came all the way up the Mississippi River during, before the time of Christ. And so that there was like this huge ocean going all the way up the Mississippi River. Well, there better not be a single archaeological site that dates to before the time of Christ in that entire region where they thought the sea existed. Does that make sense?
Totally.
But there are. So then let's go back really quick to my map and just kind of explore with a thought experiment what you're saying about the shorelines. Well, I mean, do you see anywhere where the ocean might have been? Like, let's go to the late pre-classics or before the time of Christ.
Just so you know, it was just my statement was more just a poke or a kind of a fun statement for those that do have.
I think
no, I appreciate that. You should.
I think it's good, because there's a lot of people that will explain things away the way that they're like, well, that sunk into the sea, and so that's why we don't have an answer. Well, we actually do have an answer, and Lance has the tool for you to get the answer.
Yeah, and it's a good thing to explore. Everyone should be exploring those questions. And we should also, because if it was sea level that changed or something like that, we need to be able to go to the old world and see places where sea level changed. Like there's some great studies in Israel that shows that there were some significant sea level changes, in the Iron Age, even along the Philistine coast, in Palestine. But they were minor compared to what people are talking about, and there's a theory even where it's like all of Cuba is part of where the Landsera of Himla was. And like I say, I really sympathize with those ideas that there were giant changes. I think that the changes that happened at the time of Christ were bigger than what a lot of people think, right? Because my theory is that there was actually a cometary impact. I can get into that maybe in another episode, and that's what caused all the destructions.
Well, that's a good one. I'd love to hear you say it sometime.
Yeah, I mean, as a geologist, when I read about Third Nephi, I mean, you have to consider incredible hyperbole. Like these guys were exaggerating out their ears if you are going to think that everything that it mentions in that is either just a volcano, like one volcano going off, or is just a huge earthquake, right? Because in the Heartland model, the destruction at the time of Christ, Ron and them use kind of like these awesome analogies to the New Madrid fault zone and this massive earthquake that happened in the 1800s. And it really was an incredible earthquake, because there's basically a plate suture going right down the Mississippi River, right? And so there was this really out of place, massive earthquake, even though they rarely have earthquakes in the East. And it did like crazy things. It darkened the sky because there was all this sediment that came up. It caused a lot of kind of localized things like what we see in Third Nephi, but it doesn't even come close, because in Third Nephi, we have the sky going dark, for hours, for days, right? We have not even fire being able to be lit. We have valleys being sunk in the depths of the sea, right? It says that like there were cities being sunk. It says that the earth was carried up upon other cities.
Now I gotta communicate something. There is a recorded American earthquake that has been put in a book called "The Earthquake America Forgot." When you look at, have you looked at that at all yet?
I don't know what you're talking about. The earthquake that America forgot.
Yeah. So there was an earthquake that happened in the 1800s, and it happened in Missouri, like in Madrid.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's what he's talking about. Yeah. He just discussed that.
Yeah. The New Madrid quake, and it was big. It was a big earthquake, right? So like I say, it really was legitimately huge, and it really did cause a lot of very crazy and interesting phenomenon that kind of approximates, get close to what you read in Third Nephi. But my point is, so that even with the New Madrid quake, you're not going to have the earth being carried up upon any city. Like there's no thrust fault there. There's no like ramp where you actually have like the earth burying entire cities, right? And even the idea where it says all these cities took fire. Well, why did the cities take fire? Well, we could say, well, maybe it's from the lightning, I guess. But why would a storm be accompanying an earthquake? Like there's no scientific basis for the idea that an earthquake would accompany a storm of that magnitude. I mean, maybe you have earthquake lights and some crazy earthquake phenomenon, but not a massive storm that blackens the entire sky and then has exceedingly sharp lightnings and tornadoes, because it says that people are carried up in the whirlwinds. So why on earth would you have, how could you get an event where you get not only lightning, sure, that happens with volcanoes, but whirlwinds. So tornadoes, that doesn't really happen with volcanoes. An exceedingly great storm, which had never been known throughout the land. How do you get why does a storm accompany either a volcano or a earthquake? It doesn't work, right? But there's been some awesome work. If you go to just Google on YouTube, the Los Alamos laboratories, visualizations on comet impacts, like bullite impacts. And they have, and this is, I almost hate to say some of this stuff because I kind of wanted a lot of this stuff to come out with my book, which I hadn't planned on publishing until I was like 50. But it blows my mind that nobody has ever really correlated a bullite impact or a comet as something that could be big enough to create both a storm and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions all at the same time. And not only that, I think it actually decimated all the Polynesian cultures. Like when you look at the archaeology of Polynesia, all the way from Indonesia to Hawaii, there was nobody living there until almost 1000 AD in most of those islands. And in Hawaii, it was like almost 1300 AD. So, and that's crazy because when you read about the Bronze Age Silk Road, there was trade going from China to India and even Africa, all the way back to the Bronze Age, all the way to like 2000 BC. So it's like, if they are so great at boats that they have this huge shipping lane, almost like the Phoenicians, but in the East, why aren't they inhabiting the Polynesian islands? It's like, well, I think because a bullite hit the Pacific. And that's why it says that like everyone in the Isles of the Sea would say the god of nature suffers, because it decimated the Polynesian cultures, which are uniquely related to the Book of Mormon cultures. Now we'll talk about that in another video too, how all of these cultures are related and how, especially the Philippines is actually a huge part of the Book of Mormon.
Well, so now let's transition, because I think we've covered Heartland overview, Mesoamerica overview. Let's jump into what everybody's like on the edge of their seat is. What is the Continental Model? What is this unified model? What is the Lance Weaver model that he's been building for the past 20 years and has just like softly released it on his Gathered in One site, but now it's going to be on YouTube, and I'm stoked for this.
Okay, yeah. So let's go into an overview of it, and also just to mention, it'd be great maybe if we did an episode where we invited like someone like Jerry Grover, who's a great proponent of the Mesoamerican theories, and then maybe Jonathan or Rod Meldrum to talk about the Heartland theories, and devote like an entire episode of really just going over the strengths of those, but also kind of really bringing up the weaknesses.
Oh, that would be so cool.
I'd love you to consider talking about it in a timeline aspect too. When if you could fit it in, like from Lehi getting, or at least when he arrives into either the Gulf of Mexico or on the east side of America, wherever you think that is, that'd be really fascinating, kind of see that presented that way.
And do you mean a timeline by like the internal model, what the Book of Mormon says it happens each era, or how that relates to those theories?
A timeline based on the unified model, where it's like, hey, so Lehi and his family came at this place, and then at this part when the Laman and Lemuel separated, Nephi went here.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is start your model at the same time as when, like where did Lehi take off from? And then where did Lehi land? And then how does your model go from there?
Yeah, how do they spread out from there?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just give a really close overview, just a really kind of 10,000 foot overview, and then we'll do some of these things more specifically in future videos. Okay. So this is my model, right? And really my model is based on first the premise that almost every single ancient culture is in the Book of Mormon, right? Whether it be the Mixtec, Zapotec, Mayan, Mexican Highlands, Adena, Hopewell, even the Southwest cultures, every single major culture in the North America is part of the Book of Mormon. And really they correlate with the major groups in the Book of Mormon. And then the number one premise is that the main population center to the Book of Mormon, right, is the main archaeological population center. And that is the Valley of Mexico, right? Which Joseph Smith actually has a quote where he correlates like the founding of the city of Tula to the old world, right? And archaeologically, like that, the Valley of Mexico, whether it be Cuicuilco or Teotihuacan, like those cities, even into the pre-classic, right, were the largest cities in the Americas. And I kind of mentioned last time we talked too, how it's like even the kind of father of, I mean, the Yale professor, Michael Coe, right, who is a renowned expert, and he had an interview and he talked about how that he could only believe the Book of Mormon if it would have been put in the Valley of Mexico. And he talks about, it's like, well, Joseph Smith's problem was it seems like it correlates with these Mayan cultures, but the Mayan cultures just don't take off till like, 300 to 500 AD, and their heydays at 700 to 800 AD. And they just don't have cultures that match the scope of what the Book of Mormon is trying to talk about, which are kind of like these old world major cultures. He's like, if he had placed it in the Valley of Mexico, then maybe there'd be something to it. But not really in the Mayan lands, because those cultures are so small during those time periods. But my idea is that the Valley of Mexico, where Mexico City is right now, it is the current population center of Mexico, and it always has been, right? And so I believe that that is the land of Zarahemla, okay? And I believe the land northward is North America, right? So when they went to the land northward, they went up into North America. And when they go to the land of many waters, where are there many waters? The land of many waters, fountains, and lakes, and rivers. It's like that is the Eastern United States. Anytime it talks about many waters, it's talking about the Eastern United States. And there were tons of people up there. And not only that, in my view, the land of Mulek, because it says the land of Mulek was northward and the land Lehi was southward. So in my view, the land of Mulek is the land northward. So all the Eastern United States was the land of Mulek, and all southward was Lehi, because Lehi came to land southward, but the Mulekites came first into North America, probably in through the Hudson, and kind of had a pretty big culture there that the Book of Mormon doesn't talk very much about. And then afterwards, it said they came up into the South Wilderness. So after they run into Coriantumr, because I think most of the Jaredites actually happened in North America too, but that there was southern Jaredite cities as well that were the Olmec, but that they coexisted in a continental culture that actually I think went over into Europe as well. I'll get into that later. But so if you see here, my land of Zarahemla is the Valley of Mexico, right? My land of Nephi is Oaxaca. And
when you're mentioning those, mention the color, just because on some people they'll be seeing this on their phone and it's hard to see the.
Yep. So the blue here, you see right here, the state of Oaxaca and the Oaxacan Valley, and Monte Alban is my city of Nephi, which has it has some of the coolest correlations. And we'll do our own video on that. I mentioned before how there's like one of the only east-facing 2-room, 2-column temples with an altar and even a cistern that could hold water underneath the altar. And it's up on this huge hill. They try and make it just like Jerusalem. It's actually just spectacular.
I think we should show that today. That one is so cool that we got to do that as a teaser.
Yeah, you want me
to show that.
You want me to show a little bit of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the first place I want to go. Like when we do these videos
Absolutely.
of all of these sites, like I want to start there. Like that is the coolest site. Like I can see us helicoptering up to that thing, and just be awesome.
Yeah,
and for a guy, I don't like to travel. I want to go there.
Shane, I like the helicopter idea because the hiking aspect of it seems difficult.
Lance will want to just scale the mountain, while we'll want to jump in a helicopter.
Yeah, we got to go to both. We got to go to both Teotihuacan and to
Monte Alban.
I'm down.
Okay. I don't, man, I want to get those slides and show you guys the pictures, show the audience like the pictures that I showed before. But maybe we should we maybe do that in a different episode?
Yeah, we'll do it. Go look at Monte Alban. It's coming. We're going to get into the archaeology of all of these things. Right now, it's just an overview of the model, but we're going to create slides for you to show you archaeologically why the unified model, the Continental Model of the Book of Mormon, may make the most sense.
And I'm excited. Okay. I can see him Googling on the bottom some pictures.
Okay, yeah, just you can share my screen here and we'll give people a teaser. Okay, so this right here is Monte Alban, right? This site dates, it was started exactly between 500 and 600 BC, the exact date that the Book of Mormon says. It comes on the heels of another site called San Jose Migote, which is like awesome because that is the first site that has like 2-room temples with 2 columns. And the archaeologists even say that there was like this priesthood cult that came into the city and started to create this hierarchy with a priesthood, right? Like this, the amount of specificity in this correlating with the land of Nephi is actually spectacular, like way better than Kaminal Juyu, which is the Mayan land of Nephi, right? They like level off the top of this 1,000-foot high hill, just like the temple at Jerusalem, right? It's called the White City, Monte Alban, the White Mount. They start building this massive temple complex that for 1,000 years is like the core of civilization, right? In Oaxaca. It is one of the first cities in all of Mesoamerica to have writing, right? It might even be the precursor of the Mayan script, right? Or the Isthmian script. So if you like read their history, a high culture comes in, immediately built a priesthood cult, has these crazy cities that are, and it's very rare to have east-facing temples in Mesoamerica, but these are some of the only, and definitely the only ones from 600 BC, east-facing temples with 2 columns, just like the Temple of Solomon, 2 rooms, just like the Temple of Solomon, multiple altars, which I can show you on the LiDAR that have now been torn down. And then I even told you before how it's like you've got, even in the valley, they have archaeological evidence that there was this huge division or split that happened between the 2 cultures. And one arm was occupied by something that was like hostile toward the other arm. And they've created a no man's land where there must have been a treaty between the 2 arms because they were constantly fighting with each other, right? Like the amount of detail that correlates this with the land of Nephi is mind-blowing. Like it just kills any other city correlation. It's so amazing. And like I said, we'll do our own city and I'll show it to you and we'll go there ourselves and maybe get some footage of just these crazy temple complexes.
So Lance, quick question for you. In the other models, where do they say that this temple that Nephi built that was like Solomon's temple, where do they say it was?
So in the Heartland models, I haven't heard any specific city of Nephi that really matches the archaeological record as far as radiocarbon dates for the city of Nephi. I haven't seen a single one, but I think a lot of times they kind of put it down near Etowah Mounds, maybe in Alabama or Georgia, kind of in that area, maybe up in the Tennessee Valley. And there's just a lot of different mounds that they kind of correlate it with, but there's nothing there that is a specific like this, where they could find an east-facing Solomon-like temple. And they would just kind of have to say, well, it got
destroyed.
It was built out of wood and it's gone. And there's no record even within the charcoal remains of the mountaintops that shows it. And in the Mayan land models, they all agree that the city of Caminal Juyu, which is in Guatemala, right outside of Guatemala City, is the city of Nephi. And the reason why everyone kind of agrees on that one, because it matches archaeologically as far as the time. It first was inhabited about that same time period, 600 BC. But there's no temple there either. There's nothing there that matches the Temple of Solomon, right? And there's really not a whole lot left of the site because the city got built over it. Whereas in my model, it's like, I actually think the Lord has preserved these major cities. The city of Nephi and the city of Zarahemla, God's preserved them. They're not built over. And I think, anyway.
That's like saying Jerusalem got built over. When you build a city like that's described in the Book of Mormon, it just doesn't get built over. Not when we're talking about a temple like Solomon. If it was like Solomon's temple, guess what? It's like Solomon's temple. It wasn't built out of whatever wood or whatever it was. It was built like Solomon's temple. How they did it, it's incredible. How they got it on that hill, it's amazing. And that's one of the things as I started looking and talking to you, I'm like, not only does he have a map, but he's got some archaeological sites that date to the time that are described in the Book of Mormon. And I'm wondering, why is it nobody else is talking about this?
All right, well, let me tell you why, right? I mean, because it could be anything. You could say, well, maybe in their case of the city of Zarahemla, they think it was buried by a lake, like this Santa Rosa, which is Sorensen's city of Zarahemla. It's now underwater. And maybe in your mind, you could think, well, God's preserving it underwater. But it's like, I mean, that city was tiny. That city it was smaller than Chapa de Corso. I mean, it had like somewhere between 50 and 200 temple mounds. It was really kind of a super small site compared to what I'm suggesting. But the reason why I think that nobody has correlated the Valley of Mexico, right? The population, ancient population center by a long shot with Zarahemla is because in the Book of Mormon, we know that it's south of the Narrow Neck, right? So if the city of Zarahemla is south of the Narrow Neck, well, then where's the Narrow Neck north of the Valley of Mexico? So we look on my map here and it's like, well, there's no Narrow Neck north of Mexico City. The Narrow Neck is like all south. You know, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is the northernmost of all the narrow necks that we could have. Okay. And so this is where things dawned on me that made my whole model come to life.
And this is where your model really ties in with the Nemenhah record itself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So even that, it's kind of strange that mine correlates totally with the Nemenhah record. And not only that, it correlates with every major model, right? Because there is a model out there that has the entire Book of Mormon happening on the Baja Peninsula. And why do they do that? You know, I've watched all his interviews, like two reasons. One, it's like, well, it's a really narrow neck. So it seems to correlate with that idea of there being like a narrow neck. And two, we kind of felt spiritually that it had something to do with the Book of Mormon, like not only with the climate, but just within their heart. He felt like this has something to do with the narrow neck in the Book of Mormon. In my model, Baja is the narrow neck, but the Book of Mormon doesn't take place on the narrow neck. And so I think this is the main thing that has caused people, like for the longest time, I even tried to wonder, well, did the Gulf of Mexico come way in here and make a narrow neck? Because we find all the travel in even Cortez, right? And the people who are coming up to the seven cities of Saboya, they all go up West Mexico and they call it like this narrow pass. So all of the transportation between the north and the south is happening along this narrow pass, right? So, and it's all going along the Gulf of Mexico, which they even call an arm of the sea. But it's separate from the narrow passes. And I lay out what the narrow passes are. And I think the narrow neck was just like this geographical delineator between the land northward and the land southward, in the same way that we would say that the Rio Grande River is kind of our defining feature between Mexico and North America, right? And we would always kind of like separate Mexico and the US by the Rio Grande River. I think that the ancients used the Baja Peninsula as their narrow neck, which was the main delimiter in their mind between the land northward and the land southward. But nothing actually happens on the narrow neck. It's always by the narrow neck, right?
So I got a question on that, because I've traveled to Cabo a ton and gone up and down that thing, and also I've been on the Mazatlan, Acapulco side of it. If the civilization on your map here, you know, the green and the blue and the light area is where all this is happening, and this narrow neck over here, if what you're saying, if that's Baja and Cabo's at the very, very tip of that, right? On the very bottom.
Right.
How that's very far away. Like you can't see that from the other side. Like, how do they even know about it? Why do they even reference it? Help me understand how you're tying that together, because I don't understand that part.
Well, I think it's the same reason that the Spanish use it and talk about it so much. This goes again to that idea that they were not backward people. They had tons of boats, right? And so I think that they were using that as their primary shipping channel, right? And the Nemenhah record, that's what it talks about too. We know that Haggith left from the West Sea, which I don't even know how that works with any other model. Like you put Haggith into the Great Lakes, and you try and say, well, how's the land northward Canada? And how is that a land where there's hardly any timber? And how is that a land where there was cannibalism? And how is that a land where it was desolate? And, you know, and how does that fit with Joseph Smith's land of desolation, which he says is the Great Plains, and which he says through Levi Hancock and Mosiah Hancock was the Southwest? It like Haggith doesn't work in the Great Lakes region. And then also in the Mayanland region. Why is Haggith, if the land northward is in Veracruz, right? And I'll kind of point, maybe you can kind of see my pointer here. This is where their Camorra and their land northward is. Why is Haggith leading from the West Sea? Because he says he leads from the boundary of desolation and bountiful in the land of bountiful. He builds a ship, and then 5,000 men, you know, probably 20,000 people are traveling northward. And we have all these early prophetic statements saying that one of those voyages got lost and went and visited Polynesia. Well, how do you visit Polynesia from the Great Lakes? You know, and why are you?
It's a really good point. It's something that I'm thinking. And then how does Corianton takes off from, let's see, Alma 63, verse 10, I think it is. Like, I didn't realize this until I read the Nemenhah record. It says, and it came to pass in the 39th year of the reign of the judges, Shiblon died also, and Corianton had gone forth to the land northward in a ship to carry forth provisions. So Corianton's taken ships. So I think you're right. I think they had a lot of ships They were seafaring people, and they were using the ocean, for trade and whatever else.
Yeah, and I think that dates all the way back to Nephi. So in my book, I will show you some amazing evidence of tons of voyages to the New World from the Old World, all the way back from Egyptian times, right? I think that Corral and Watson Brake actually have Egyptian origins. The Egyptians were coming to the New World. And I have evidence of that in my Colburn book that I talk about in other videos that talk about them taking records all across the earth. And so these shipping lanes would open up during really prosperous periods where you had a really large empire. And then when the empire collapsed, the shipping lanes would collapse and the trade would collapse. And it would take a couple hundred years for it to reestablish itself. But one of them opened up with the Assyrians and lasted all the way into the Babylonians. And there's a lot of iconography that actually matches between Assyrian and Babylonian artwork and Mesoamerican artwork. So I think Nephi was actually following a shipping channel. And I think that he probably was talking with other people who had made this voyage as well, because there was quite a few New World travelers, and that they'd come all the way up the coast. And the reason why, even from the landing of Nephi, they're talking about sheep and all these animals that don't exist in the Mayan models or the Heartland models. They only exist in the Southwest and along Baja and stuff like that. I think the reason is because even at the time of Nephi, he's either talking to or personally are taking ships all the way up the coast into the Gulf of Mexico, right? And so the narrow neck is Baja. The narrow passes are actually those narrow ecological kind of these narrow travel corridors between the Sierra Madre and the coast. And they really are narrow. Like I've driven up through Sinaloa and Sonora, and it's like, it is bountiful. It's like the breadbasket of Mexico. You know, most of the grains and most of the food is grown in Mexican highland, which is why it's called the land of bountiful. And then extends all the way up into the Sinaloan coast. And it's almost like you're in Kansas when you drive through it. It's only massive plantations. And then the second you hit the narrow neck, second you hit Baja, it creates this rain shadow. And within 50 miles, it just turns desolate. Like from ultra productive farmland to desolate desert. And so I think that is the border between desolation and bountiful. And it's actually the earliest Jaredite heartland. And I have a bunch of really cool evidence with that. We'll get in the future, my whole Jaredite timeline, because I think they went north and south. They went all the way from Cumorah to Zarahemla, which is mentioned in the Book of Ether. And I think that it solves everything. Like once you kind of rearrange your mind and read through every narrow neck instance and realize that it's like, oh, so I mean, I could totally see how in their minds they would kind of think that first of all, northern Mexico kind of does have the ocean coming in a way, right? So that is kind of narrow in itself, but then you've got this narrow neck, which is Baja. And in one case, the narrow neck is almost mentioned like a sea. Like when it talks about Haggith, it's almost talking like the narrow neck is a sea, not even a land. Like in that case, it's talking about the narrow neck of sea instead of the narrow neck of land. Well, I mean, that perfectly describes the Gulf of California and goes along with all these early chronologers like Isli Xochitl, who's totally talking about these ancient voyages, these ancient journeys of the Toltec Indians that are going all the way from North America to South America, and they always go up the West Coast through this narrow travel corridor, which is only a day and a half journey wide, right? It really is only about 25 to 30 miles wide, this coastal plain. And then you have this huge mountain, impenetrable mountain range. And then the central part that I have drawn here is like impassable. Like you drive through there, it is impassable. There's no sites in there, and there's no travel in there because it is such a crazy desert, especially as you get the south area. There's like this barrier of cactuses that are like 10 feet high. It's crazy. Anyway,
so in your mind, the people that we have in Alma 63, the 20,000, 30,000 people that are going on their own pioneer trek, where are they going? Like, are they going up the coast?
Yeah, they're going up the west with Haggith specifically. They're going up the west coast, all the way up the Colorado River and then the Salt River, which was navigable until just recently, until Phoenix stole all the water. You could actually take a canoe up into the Valley of Mexico, and they were starting all the early Hohokam, Mogollon. There's a lot of early archaeological tribes that started about the time of Christ in the Southwest, which then grows to become the Anasazi or ancient Puebloans. And I think they're stripping a lot of resources out of the Colorado Rockies and taking it down to Mexico in the same way that when we inhabited the North America, we immediately had all these trappers head to the Rocky Mountains and start getting all these fur pelts and all of these resources and shipping them to New York. But try finding those even today in the archaeological record. They're all perishable, so they don't show up. But I think that there was a huge trade where they were pulling resources out of the Rocky Mountains and bringing it down to Mexico City.
And then in the Nemanhah record, Corey Anton, he finds a people that are there.
Yeah.
And so that's the other part of this is like, you know, there were other people inhabiting North America, and they kind of run in and find these different people. So
yeah, and he goes east, and so there's tons of people in the eastern United States too, and they're trading down. And this goes back to what I was saying, that I think that the archaeologists saw the Native American people as being more archaic than they were for a long time, but now just recently, with the advent of being able to find just like microscopic traces of cacao, now they're suddenly finding all this evidence where it's like, well, we've got cacao all over the Southwest and cacao all over the eastern United States. So there actually must have been big trade corridors going all the way from the Southwest and eastern United States down to Mexico City, where the main population was.
Fascinating. Okay. I think
Mind blowing.
This kind of gives us the overview. There's so much more as we get into the Continental Model, in going through the archaeology. We're going to cover that in some upcoming episodes with Lance. You got to understand, we're going to just really dive in and flesh this out. And I'm excited that we might be able to, you know, bring in a Rod Meldrum, or you said Jonathan Neville is his name. I'm not familiar with him. Or,
yeah, he's awesome.
Or Brother Gardner. Hey, Brother Gardner, I know you and Lance have gone back and forth, but come on the show. Let's discuss it. Is it Brent Gardner?
Jerry Grover would be a great one, I think.
Jerry Grover.
He's great, fellow geologist.
Okay. Jerry Grover, come on the show. Let's do is, I think DNC 88 verse 77 says, as I'm kind of going there, I think it's important as members of the church that we discuss these things. It says, and I give unto you a commandment that you shall teach one another the doctrine of the kingdom. Teach ye diligently, and my grace shall attend you, that you may be instructed more perfectly in theory. So, like, these are theories. I tend to follow theories where guys have evidence and they've done a ton of work. And I love Lance because he's also saying, like, hey, I'm open to, if I missed something or didn't see something, or you have something that you think is important, hey, bring it up. Let's discuss it. And let's, you know, not debate or argue it. Let's just theorize and discuss it and see if we can solve this geography question. Because if we solve the goal is to bring people to Christ. And if the Book of Mormon is true, then Joseph Smith's a prophet, and the priesthood's restored, and on and on and on. And so I love discussing this. Lance, thank you so much. I'm excited to jump into the next episode after this one and really get into the archaeological sites and evidences, and just talking about where Lehi and Nephi left from, and where they landed, and then what happened. Yeah, it's going to be incredible. Any other final thoughts?
I mean, I think people will love it if we go through with other people and we just go through scripture after scripture and just kind of stick to the scriptures and talk about our correlations. And then, in future episodes, like I say, we've touched the tiniest bit of the iceberg. Like I say, I have every single city. I have the Riverside, and we have so many, like hundreds of pages worth of stuff that we could just touch on parts of that in other videos.
Are you starting to pull in things from the Nemenhah record as well, as you've kind of looked at your geography compared to that record?
I mean, I've never pulled anything in from that, but from the earliest days when I found that, because I love channeled literature. I have my own ideas on all these cool channeled stuff out there. And I just always thought it was interesting. It was like, hey, that book actually correlates almost perfectly with my model. And only that correlates with some quotes by Joseph Smith in strange ways. So I found it very interesting from, I don't know what it was, 6-7 years ago when I first found it, 6 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Trevor, David, any final thoughts? Nothing?
Nothing for me. This was fantastic. Thank you.
No words to describe what just happened.
Let's do it again. Let's do it again sometime.
We've got so much more coming to you from Lance Weaver. Again, he is an expert in this field, and I think he's onto something. So remember, we're living in a day and an age, DNC 121, where nothing shall be withheld from them. So here we are. For myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. Remember to like and subscribe. That's how we keep this channel going. We are doing everything we can to get David Douglas a full-time job here at Zion Media through the work that we're doing. So thank you all for subscribing and watching this video. Again, for myself, Shane Baldwin, David the Lion Douglas, Trevor Keys, Lance, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you guys. You're awesome.